It's a really, really saturated space. And so I think the biggest key to that, ironically, is the same key it would be if you were starting a college football show and none of them existed. And it's just define what you're good at, define what the actual core of the content is, in this case, college football. Define what the audience wants. Just Venn diagram it.
Welcome to the Waves Business Coaching Podcast, where you can learn how to grow as a leader, inspire your team, and optimize the operations in your organization. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, and this week on the podcast, I have on Josh Pate of 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports. Josh runs the largest college football show, most consumed college football show in digital media, and he shares about what led to his success in growing his organization and his show, and also leading a team of people and how pouring into your team can lead to huge success and be a huge motivator for you in your business. If you want to learn how you can bring the best out of your team, be sure to go to wavesbusinesscoaching.com, which is linked in the episode description. We'd love to equip you with the tools and resources to optimize your business and give you peace of mind as a business leader. Let's dive into my conversation with Josh Pate. Josh Pate, thank you so much for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. I don't want to give anything away from your story, but for those that don't know, you're about to share, but something that's always inspired me about you is your perseverance and how you've created what you've created. Can you kind of share with me a little bit about your story coming from Columbus, Georgia to having the late kick? And I'll let you share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, man. You hear stories a lot, I guess, about people who grew up with absolutely nothing and made it. And I love those stories. You hear stories about folks who grew up with everything and blew it. And I learn from those stories. I'm not going to say I love them, but I learn from them. But yeah, I think there is this entire chunk of just American society that fits more what I was. I certainly didn't grow up wealthy by any means. In fact, if you draw the Mendoza line, I was a lot Southern on that as opposed to Northern. But I did not grow up needing for a whole lot. Never doubted that I would have my next meal. That came later, actually. But as a child, I did not grow up. We grew up lower middle income, I would say. So my point in saying that is, a lot of times if you grow up with nothing, you are forced to essentially be a breadwinner for your family. You're forced to be their way out or be your own way out. I never felt that way. I also knew, though, that there was no nest egg waiting for me when I turned 18 to where it didn't really matter whether I got a liberal arts degree or mechanical engineering. I'll just be taken care of. And so, it creates this question in your mind, but it also doesn't create this urgency. Now, if you're a self-starter, that doesn't matter. I had buddies that grew up in the same neighborhood as I did, straight A's and very motivated. And I wish I was that back then, but I wasn't. And so I just kind of floated. Decent student, just kind of floated. And if you were to ask me at 8 years old or even 18 years old, who are you? If you were just to ask, who are you? I would have given you my name. I would have given you the stuff on my birth certificate, basically, but I wouldn't have been able to cut myself open and tell you, here are my passions. Here's what drives me. Here's my desire. Here are my goals. I didn't know, man. I just didn't think. I thought that was adults' way of thinking. And I'm just a kid. Well, when you're 18, you're not just a kid anymore. And so I ended up, leaving college. I had an academic scholarship, but I didn't really care about academics. And so a few semesters into college, I realized I have no clue. I'm wasting this. I have no clue where I'm going. So I drop out for a little while. I never intended to just drop out for good. I intended to go back, but I wanted to go back when I thought I was putting it to good use. So I go and I work all kind of manual labor jobs down there in Georgia. AC, heating and air installation, worked construction, and worked HVAC as well. And so I ended up in a fabric warehouse down in Columbus, and I was just listening to talk radio all day. That's all I did. That's all you can do, man. If your job is to grommet and staple and cut fabric all day, you have got to find something to make that day go quicker, because those are the longest days that God can possibly put upon one. We'd listen to like ESPN radio during the day. This is late 2000s. This is when your whole Colin Cowherd, Mike and Mike, that rotation would be in place. And so I listened, but I started doing what I would end up calling observational listening. I realized my buddies, elsewhere in the fabric warehouse, they would just listen to the content. And I would listen to it as well, and I'd get a lot out of it, and I'd be entertained by it. But I would also pay a lot of attention to how they slotted, how they formatted, how they programmed, how they in and out interviews and whatnot, and why they said what they said, how they said what they said, diction, tempo, all that sort of thing. And it didn't really occur to me that I was listening that way until I would talk with my buddies, and they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" So I realized I may have a little passion for that. Certainly, I love sports, but pretty much all of us did growing up.
Yeah.
I think I can talk about it at a high level, but everyone thinks they can. So I didn't know that I was cut out anywhere above and beyond everybody in my social circle.
Yeah.
But I did know that I wish I could pursue that. But how do you do it? Because back then, and this is not that long ago, but back then, you had a couple of ways into that industry. You either go up to Syracuse and Northwestern, one of the big J schools, journalism schools, and get your degree, and then go up the usual rungs of the ladder, or someone in the industry, your dad, your uncle, your grandfather, and that's how you get your in. And there weren't really many other ways in.
Yeah.
And I knew neither one of those was probably happening for me. So you kind of convince yourself that, well, that's a world up there. That's a world they live in, and I'll just listen to it. So I get to about 2012 or 13, and I'm just going nowhere. And at this point, you're not 18 or 19 years old anymore. And you had that creeping fear in the back of your mind that, am I becoming a statistic? Like, am I becoming one of those people you see in the movies where, the successful folks you went to high school with come back home for the 20-year reunion, and they're the ones who have never left, and they've never done anything with their lives. That is a creeping daily fear for me at this point. So I start badgering, just hounding the local program directors for radio stations down there. Can I just come watch what you do? Can I come observe what you do? I wasn't begging to be put on air, but I did want to see how it works.
Yeah.
And the ESPN radio affiliate down there had an afternoon drive show. And Bobby Roblowski, who had been a big-time FM DJ all across the country back in the vintage FM years, he was doing sports talk there. He said, "Yeah, you can come on in." Didn't know me. I'd never met him before. But he said, "Yeah, you can come on in." And so I came in, and I'd never seen a working studio before. I had never seen live production and live broadcast, TV or radio before. So I was fascinated by it. And about 2 months in, his co-host got sick one day. So out of nowhere, he's got a void. And he was not a solo kind of guy. He needed a sounding board to bounce things off of. And so he said, "You want to hop on air?" So I hopped on air. And before that moment, I had never been on live anything before. But what I had been doing, because I read a book about patterns and the way you allocate your time and spending versus investing time, is I had tried to take some of my time when I would drive around in my truck daily that I was spending listening to music, and I tried to invest it. And so I turned the music off, and I would just practice like I was on talk radio, and I just talk, just go and go and go. And I'd accumulated like thousands of hours of doing that. So you fast forward to this moment, and I go on air. We do afternoon drive in the heart of college football season. Felt great. I felt a little unnatural, but I felt great doing it, very at ease. And so afterwards, he wanted to know where I had worked before. And I told him, "Well, I haven't worked anywhere before." I explained, how I knew what I knew, but I knew it because I was passionate about college football. The way I was able to talk it is because I had been doing it for a long time, just not into a microphone. Well, he never took me off air. So I stayed on air for 2.5 years there. And we did every day afternoon drive. Some of the most fun I've ever had. No air conditioning in that studio, by the way, but some of the most fun I've ever had. So, big time OSHA violation, now that I think about it.
That's right.
So I got a call one day from a general manager at a TV station down in Columbus who I'd never met before. In fact, he left a voicemail. He said, "You've never met me before. Don't worry about that." He said, "My sales general manager and I, we both leave the office about 4:30 or 5 o'clock every day. You're on the radio. We both listen to you, whether we knew it or not. We were both listening to you. And so we were tossing around an idea here at the TV station. We want to do a local weeknight college football show that sounds a lot like what you already do on radio. Would you be interested?" I said, "Well, sure." And I didn't even, this is how dumb I was. I didn't even ask if it paid. I just wanted to go do TV.
That's
Yeah.
right.
And I said, I've never been on TV. Is that a problem? And he said, oh, of course not, which is a lie. But he said it to get me over there. So we started doing that. I ended up actually being their sports anchor, ended up being their news anchor over time over there as well at WLTD NBC 38 there in Columbus, Georgia. But that was the moment that started to unlock some things. Number one, it's your first reps on TV, and you'll always be terrible when you're first put on TV. And you learn that, you get humbled by that. But also, a couple of years in, when I'd gotten my chops for that part of the industry, and also started to understand there may be a future in this, that is when the streaming giants changed the game totally. And that's when Facebook let you start going live. That's when YouTube, shortly thereafter, started letting you go live. Now, I know that anyone who's listening to this right now, let's say you're 20 years old, you've pretty much only lived in a world where that existed.
Yeah.
But the people who are 30 years old or 40 or older, they remember that there used to be a time where you didn't do that. There used to be no social media, but even when there was a time when it was just an interface. You didn't go on there for video streaming purposes. Well, when you were able to do that, think about my situation. I don't have that classical journalism degree from one of the big boys up north. I don't have any relatives or family in the business. But what I do have now that you've done this is I've got everything I need in my hand. Theoretically, distribution, I've got in my hand. Worldwide audience, potentially at your fingertips. Production, don't need it anymore. I don't need a fancy studio that someone holds the keys to with tens of millions of dollars of equipment because I've got it in my hand. And once you took away the barriers of overhead and distribution in our business, it was game on. I knew that in the mid-20 teens. I knew that. So I started immediately shifting my focus. I appreciate these folks for giving me an opportunity on local TV, but that became my focus. And they didn't like it. Understandably so, because they weren't paying me to do that. They were paying me to do a local show. So about a year left on my contract at that point. So I bite the bullet for a year. Come contract's end, they wait till the last day of my contract, and they wanted to re-up me. They were calling my bluff. I was telling them I'm done, I'm leaving. Yeah. They were calling my bluff. Final day, they sat me down, news director and GM, and said, "We've been calling your bluff. What are you about to do? Are you really leaving? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do?" And I said, "I'm starting a YouTube channel," which I had told them, but they just thought I was lying about it. And the GM says, "But you can't monetize that," because at the time, no one was making big money on YouTube.
Right.
I just thought that things would shift, and boy, have they. So they came to an agreement. And they said, "Look, if you're employed here, we can't be letting you do an independent channel as well. We can't let that fly. But what we can do is listen to your ideas. Like, what could you do? We don't want to lose you as our morning news anchor," which I was at that point. So we came to an agreement where I would 1099. I would independent contract with them. I would still perform my duties. So as far as the audience knew, nothing changed. But the trade-off is I get 3 nights per week in this studio, an hour per night, to produce whatever I want to produce, wherever I want to produce it. So they kind of laugh, like they think they've pulled one over on me, because they're taking away salary benefits. They're handing me pennies on the dollar of what I had been making, and they're still getting everything that they were getting out of me. But I don't think what they understood is not only was I about to venture out on my own independently, but I was going to do it with pretty large scale production in my sales. And that's a wind in your sales no one else had. Everyone else was having to use cell phone or whatnot. Right. And I had the backing of a legitimate television studio and television equipment. I mean, professional lighting, 3-4 cam setup, professional production. So we started that channel, called it Late Kick, just like I do now. And it launched, and we took about a year and a half. And I got a call from CBS 24/7, and Shannon Terry, who was there at the time, said, "We don't have anything like that. So how about coming up here and doing that for us?" And so all of a sudden, that's it. That's big break time. Moved to Nashville right before COVID happened. Moved to Nashville.
Right.
We started the show here, and it exploded even during COVID, when we didn't even know if we were going to have college football. Yep. Because what we're going to probably talk about in a little while became very, very obvious, and that was people were starved for a college football national show to deliver what it claimed it would deliver. And
Yeah.
that may sound so rudimentary, and it is, but it was in very short supply when we started this show at that time. So that's a brief overview of the history there.
And then at what point did you write the hit TV show Outer Banks? Did that come?
It's a great question. All right, so assuming we have the rights to edit anything and everything we want out of this, look, here's the situation. Some of us are named like Bartholomew, a last name that has 14 syllables, and at that point, no one else has your name. But
Yeah.
some of us are named Josh Pate. And so while that's not a common name, it does exist. And it just so happens that the hit Netflix show Outer Banks was also directed and created by a guy named Josh Pate. And it's really been a battle that I have fought with him silently. We've never met each other, but he's been a big deal. Okay, I hope to be a big deal. And so when you used to Google Josh Pate, it was just him. Now when you Google Josh Pate, it'll show my information and one of his pictures and one of my pictures. And so we're kind of, I like to think that we're both aware of each other, even though we've never met each other. And then there are large swaths of the American public out there that just think we're the same person.
To be fair, I've never seen you both in the same room. So
Nor have I. Yeah, nor have I.
Jury's out. So the Late Kick, it's now, I mean, I'll brag if you don't want to. It is the biggest college football show in the world. And I say that that is not streaming on national TV, like in a digital media. It's the biggest college football show in the world. You started a college football show in, like you said, a very well-established industry where barriers were hard to break through. What about your show sets it apart and like continues to set it apart from these legacy brands like the ESPNs, the Fox, the CBS? I know you're under that umbrella, but they've still got their national show that they like inside college football. Yours is very different. What sets it apart?
Yeah, you mentioned that there. People can gloss over that sometimes, but it's very valuable. It's very important to know the perception from the independent media world, which I was once upon a time in, and like to fancy myself as still being in tune with. The fear if in the independent world is if you ever go corporate, if you ever sign on with a corporate entity, they'll strip you of everything that's authentic about you. And that was a fear of mine as well. So when I came to CBS in the winter of 2020, I had that fear, but at the same time, I knew I had to take it. It's my big break.
Yeah.
We were so successful so quickly with the show that CBS promised, even when I came here, they said, we don't want to take anything away from you. What you're doing is what attracted us to you. So we're not going to try and put a CBS coat of paint on everything you do. They have been true to their word to this day. We're now in February of 2024. To this day, nobody has ever interfered with anything we've done. We've got full oversight. I'm the executive producer of the show, full creative control. They have never interfered. And because they haven't done that, we've built an ultra successful, authentic, independent feeling show. We've just done it with all the corporate bells and whistles and backing. And that's a world where 4 years ago, someone would have told you that's a unicorn. That can't actually happen. Well, I know why they used to say that, but it's not a unicorn. Or if it is, I guess unicorns really exist because we've got one. And I think part of the reason is we scaled so quick when we got here that there was never a trial and error period. There was never a test run. It just worked. And so now, you mentioned it. It's the most consumed college football show in all of digital media, and that's a crowded space. It's a really, really saturated space. And so I think the biggest key to that, ironically, is the same key it would be if you were starting a college football show and none of them existed. And it's just define what you're good at, define what the actual core of the content is, in this case, college football. Define what the audience wants. Just Venn diagram it. Or if you want to, if you're in a crowded space, define them, everyone else, define the audience, define yourself, draw your 3 little circles, find out where the common overlaps are, and especially that core area where everyone and you are all doing something, but the audience loves it. That's the sweet spot. That's going to be the most competitive zone. But that's where you need to hang out. But where you really need to hang out is where you and that audience overlap, but no one else does. That's the area where you make game-changing money and game-changing progress in scaling your brand. And it's so simple, actually, that if you start to draw a little Venn diagram on a piece of paper, folks who are hardened in the business world, they'll chuckle at it. They'll start to chuckle as if to say, well, it can't be this simple, or someone would have long since figured it out. The principles are always simple. The pillars and the foundational elements, they're always simple. People overthinking the room is why a college football show can launch as late as 2020 and take over the space. It's because people overthink the room, or people get lazy, or people count on the brand on their polo to carry the day instead of them carrying the day. Brands do not win. People win. And that can be something that fools you, because when you think of Amazon or you think of Apple, you think of brands. And that's very good marketing on their part. It's the people that made it happen. The logo didn't just pop up overnight. So when I do consultation now, the number one question by a mile that college students will ask me is, should I bother doing this because the market is so saturated? Or how do I cut through if the market is so saturated? And they'll say it in a context that when you started, it wasn't, but now when I'm trying to start, it is. And I tell them, it was saturated when I did it.
Yeah.
And it didn't take 15 years. We scaled this thing pretty quickly. Well, the way you do it is you deliver what you know people want. In fact, a lot of times, the biggest error that people make in our business is they format shows for themselves. They don't format the show for the audience. And then they wonder why the audience isn't listening. And you almost think to yourself, why are they so dumb? Why can't they figure out how good this show is? Well, of course you think it's good. You made it for you. You didn't make it for them, though. And so that's part one. But part two is, if you are creating quality content, it's like, it's like the old analogy of planting the seed, and you water it properly, but it's not going to grow overnight, but it is growing. And so if you got a little patience about yourself and you're doing it right, what you'll find is, as Meemaw used to say, a lighthouse is just as tall in the middle of the ocean as it is in the middle of a lake. Meaning, it doesn't matter how much saturation there is around you. If your product is truly standing out for the right reasons, it's just as tall as it would be anywhere else. It's just as noticeable as it would be anywhere else. It may take people a little longer to see it in the ocean, but once they see it, I think still 100 feet tall from base to tip, just as it would be in a lake, just as it would be on dry land. So that's how I think about our show. And I'll tell you another thing. This would actually take us 2 hours because it's an entirely new psychology. But another thing that aggravates me a lot is the way people motivate themselves. And the overwhelming prevailing wisdom is, you've got to focus on the competition. And in my industry, it's really like that. You got to go out there, you got to find the 5 shows that are most like yours, or the 5 personalities who are most like you, and that's your competition. And you just keep an eye to the left and right all day. What are they doing? What are they doing? It's the dumbest way to think, because they're not capable of what you're capable of. You're not capable of what they're capable of. Yeah. You are one of one. Everyone is uniquely programmed and designed. And I may be 30% smarter, but 20% less creative than George over here. But the point is, we've all got a race to run.
Yeah.
And again, I could take 2 hours on this, but what happens if I'm capable of 30% more than everybody else, but I rest on my laurels because I'm 3% ahead of them? I've not achieved anything. I failed, actually. I could be number one in my industry and have failed there. Conversely, if I'm not capable of nearly as much as them, but I'm above my skis and I'm right there neck and neck with them, I may have the 3rd best show in the world, but I am overachieving. I have succeeded because it's all relative to what I'm capable of. The other thing is this idea in a digital media world that you have to compete against other people and their shows. In 1994, if you and I had an afternoon drive radio show, or you and I had a primetime TV show, and we both came on at 7 Eastern, 6 Central, we are competition. It is a zero-sum game. There is no on-demand world. You're watching it as it airs, or either you don't see it. And even if you VHS it, we don't get credit for it in the Nielsen rating. So you've got to be watching me as I'm on. Well, that means I'm going to fight you to the death for every viewer or listener, because every one of them you get is one I literally can't get. So the way you thought about content competition used to be different. Nowadays, there are people who grew up in the legacy media age who still think like that. And meanwhile, the audience is like, well, I don't care what time you're on. I'll listen to you whenever I want. I'll watch
Right.
you whenever I want, whether it's TV or whether it's digital, podcasting, YouTube, etc. It's a totally on-demand world now, to where unless it's a live game, there is no need to watch anything live to get 90+% of the germane content out of it. So I have seen in our industry how people are so antiquated in their thinking, and yet the way you should be thinking is, I don't care if I got the #1 show in the world and you got the #2 show in the world. I'll actively promote you on my show. I don't
Yep.
even mean bringing you on. I mean mentioning you. I mean dropping you. I mean referencing things you said and or things you wrote or whatnot. Because the high tide raises all boats in an
Right.
on-demand digital world, and people who don't get it sound so foolish, and they actually think you sound foolish or soft when you don't embrace the spirit of competition. The competition's against the standard, the same way it always should have been. But
Yep.
nowadays, it's even dumber to look at other people in your space and call yourself competing with them, because it's not 1994, man. That's not the modern way, or should be the modern way of doing things.
You have a college football show. I'm a big college football fan. I'm a big Georgia fan. Kirby always says we're playing to the Georgia standard. Like, it doesn't matter.
There you
Like,
go.
Georgia shouldn't be beating Georgia Southern by 1. They should be beating them by 42. So it's like, looking side to side and comparing yourself to Georgia Southern for Georgia is a terrible idea. That's why horses have blinders on.
Yeah.
Hey, it's the finish line. It doesn't matter what all the other horses are doing. It's forward.
Well, hey, the other thing, the other big lie, and I talk about this in college football all the time, but it matters here. One of the big lies I think people tell in college football is you are what your record says you are.
Yeah.
And that's a lie. It's a lie, because if I'm Alabama and I play 3 FCS teams and go 3-0, but beat them all by the last second field goal, that's much different than soul dragging all of them by 60. But at the end of the day, some dude out there saying, well, 3-0 is 3-0. You are what your record says you are. Well, no, you're not. In this world, you are what your record says you are. I could be competing against kids fresh out of high school, and if I'm just barely edging them out, hey man, I got a better show than them. I'm 1-0 against this high school kid here. Well, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because you're not achieving. And if
Right.
that is the highest level you can achieve at, you probably need to find a new line of work. So you're not what your record says you are unless you properly define what record means, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I come from Chick-fil-A, and it'd be like, not trying to take shots at brands here. It'd be like Chick-fil-A saying, "Hey, we're better than McDonald's across the street." It's like that's nice and all, but isn't the standard a little bit higher than that, or
Yeah.
a lot higher than that? Something else you mentioned too, the tide raising all boats. My old boss at Chick-fil-A said, we had a Chick-fil-A in Largo, Florida, and they were building a Five Guys and a Chipotle like right next to us on either side. And we were kind of by ourselves in the little area, and they're building 2 more restaurants. And I'm like, are you worried? Are we going to take a sales hit? What's going to happen? And he's like, no, we're probably going to have the biggest increase we've had in a few years. And they're also going to do well. Like, all 3 restaurants being here is actually really good for our business, because it's just going to bring more people to this area, this side of the street. And so I think that's a great principle too. You mentioned audience feedback playing a big role in late kick and your content strategy. How important is that feedback and interaction in like determining the direction and the content of your show?
Well, it's totally, like I said a little while ago, if I claim to be formatting a show for them, I probably need to shut up and listen to them.
Yeah.
And that's very antithetical to what people think the job requires. Because especially if you're solo, like I am, at least on air, if you're solo, you think about the job as being you talking, you talking, you talking. And while the red light is on, that is what's happening. But it is so important for that content to be driven by the audience. It's not, to me, it's no different than a restaurant. To me, it's no different than me being a chef back there. I'm the one over the flame. I'm the one preparing the meal. But if I haven't done any R&D, if I haven't done any focus grouping, if I haven't listened or looked at ordering patterns and foot traffic patterns and found out that this dish I'm serving never gets ordered, this one gets ordered to where we run out of ingredients every night. If I don't listen to that, I'm a fool. And I deserve whatever failure comes my way. And there's no guarantee that when you listen to them, you'll succeed, because you may deliver what you claim they want and they just don't like your version of it. But the other side is certain failure. And so in my world, I learned that in 2020, really before that, but in 2020, I learned when I came there and we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and people in our space, like people in the sports media world, started to talk about that on their shows. And the audience was so universal in their response. Stop talking about that. I can turn on news. There are 50 different places I can go to listen to that talked about.
Right.
This is an oasis. This is
Yeah.
an island in the middle of the ocean. I'm coming to you to get away from that. What are you doing? The messaging was so clear. And yet, so many people ignored the audience and said, nope, I know what's best for you. I'm going to talk about something that I know nothing about, because hardly anyone did, still don't
Yeah.
really. And I am going to just force my beliefs and opinions outside the world of sports on you. Well, you slap your audience in the face when you do that. You don't get to do that twice. And
Yeah.
so there was a mass exodus right around the time I'm starting my show. There's this mass exodus, and there are so many big portions of the endemic college football audience and sporting audience that are wandering. For the first time in a long time, they're wandering, and they're wandering because they've been abandoned by their own shows. And so all of a sudden, if you're doing a show named College Football, and it just speaks about college football, they come, they've never seen you, they've never heard of you, but you do a half decent job, and they say, wait, there was no take on anything to do with anything other than college football. Are you serious? There's something like that out there? I'm in. And we gave the audience what they wanted then. I've never stopped listening to them. I never will stop listening to them. I think it helps that they're well aware I am them. Not to bemoan anyone else in our business, but look, it's reality. There are a lot of folks in my business that have never really sat in the stands before. There are folks in my business who could not relate or rub elbows with the tailgating crowd. And that's my world. That's where I grew up. It's basically like CBS might as well have walked out in the middle of a sea of humanity on Saturday afternoon and just plucked someone out of that crowd and put them in my chair, because that's basically who I am. And so it's not hard for me to relate to those folks because they're my folks. And so it's not hard for me to listen to them because that's what I would do anyway. I think it is a little harder for people who subconsciously view themselves as being above their audience to listen to them because they don't think that they are their equals. And I do. So it is easy for me.
Well, in your content, I mean, with StoryBrand, which is the organization I work with, like, we talk about what does your character audience want, what's getting in their way, how can you as the guide help them solve that problem. And with your show, it's very like, hey, what do they want, a college football show? And you could dig way deeper into that and be, what topics do you talk about, what teams do you talk about, stuff like that. And then you're the guide who solves that problem, and you get to be audience centric. And that's why your show is, I mean, year over year exponentially grown. It's still blowing me away that I'm like, oh, it'll eventually slow down, but it just hasn't yet. And I don't say that negatively. I'm just like, oh yeah, like eventually, like exponential growth eventually slows down. And for your show, it just hasn't yet. Something you mentioned on another podcast that you were on was bringing along other people as you grow, and that being a big motivator for you, and that you've assembled and led a team, and you've got to kind of bring them along and help change their lives financially. How important is that to you? And like, how has that been a motivator for you as you've grown the Late Kick?
It's a core motivator. I think about that more than I think about how many people are watching the show. Ironically, it's not a lie. So that's the real way I think about this. Look, I was a big pro wrestling fan growing up. So nowadays I don't watch current pro wrestling as much as I will listen to podcasting or interviews or watch the old stuff.
Yeah.
Because that's the time where that business exploded. If you're a kid from the late 90s, early 2000s, you remember NASCAR exploding, you remember pro wrestling exploding, and you remember the Braves on TBS every night. So
that's right.
I remember being a kid living through that era. But since then, all those guys are retired now, and I'll listen to them talk. And I remember one day I was listening to someone talk about working in the same era as Steve Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin, who was the biggest draw, perhaps in the history of the sport. It's him, Hulk Hogan, and those are just megastars. They transcended pro wrestling to where if you don't care about that genre, you still know those names. So I was listening to a guy who was not him, but he was talking about being on the same card as Steve Austin and being in the business the same time as him. And he was talking about how many $1 million+ per year earners they would have any given year. Now, Austin was over $1 million a month at his peak as a pro wrestler.
Yeah.
But what happened was the money he brought in, the attention he brought in, the groundswell of new folks that he brought through the turnstiles was such that if you were just on the same card as him, if you just happened to exist in the same world as him, you benefited financially. So not only did he make himself life-changing money and completely alter his and his kids' lives forever, he altered hundreds and hundreds to thousands of other people's lives, and he didn't even really know he was doing it. And so I listened to that one day, and I thought to myself, that's a new way of thinking for me. Because I had never thought about, look, I didn't even know whether my future would ever be financially secure. But even if it was going to be, I had only ever thought about it in terms of me. I thought about it selfishly. That changed my perspective to where, think of it as, punching the ocean and the ripple effect, depending on how hard that punch is and how much it can impact other people around you. So now I'm totally inverted on my thinking. I mean, I immensely appreciate the blessings that I'm able to get just from a pure financial standpoint. Our show does phenomenally, but I don't spend any money. So I wear the same 3 or 4 t-shirts per week. So I'm good. Like I will always live well within my means.
Yeah.
But what I know we can do now is I know we can put life-changing money in the pockets of many other people. From production to directors to anyone who touches the show, anyone who impacts the show, we can change those lives. And that is always and will always be my goal now. And I would love one day for someone to look back on this show and talk like that. Don't be talking about how good the show was. Yes, I appreciate that. Don't be talking about how good I was. I'd love for someone to say that. I want them to talk about how many lives were changed because the show happened, just because it existed.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, a college football show that launched on YouTube, ending up having that kind of impact, that's a big deal to me. That's a game changer. And you're doing good that you may never even know about. You'll never even know all the good that you're doing on that front. But I'm a very big believer in to whom much is given, much is required. And so I've been given more than anyone in my space. So I think a lot's required. And that's one of the things that I think is not only something I can do, that's something that I'm called to do. And it's something we take really seriously.
Josh, I had a boss tell me, take care of your team, they'll take care of the business. And they didn't just tell me that, they were doing that for me. And so I've been a product of that. And it's something I'm a huge believer in now. It's just like, hey, if you take care of your immediate team, in your case, the show's going to do more than fine because they're going to work their butts off for you just because they know you've got their back. Josh, where can people find more about you and the Late Kick?
Well, we do the show to meet you wherever you are. So if you like YouTube, Late Kick with Josh Pate, it can be found anywhere on there. If you're a podcast type, Late Kick with Josh Pate. Would not be shocked if that name changed at some point this year. So just subscribe to the feed and you'll always be in the know. The socials at Late Kick Josh. There's stuff all over the place. So if you're looking for it, you will find it.
I'll also link it in the episode description. Josh, thank you so much for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast.
Appreciate it, brother.
Take care. Thanks so much to Josh for being on the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Side note, Josh actually helped me and my friend Daniel start our other podcast. We have a college football podcast as well. And he's just been a huge inspiration and help to us. And it's cool to watch his show grow. So thanks so much to Josh. I know that I've learned a lot from how he's been successful, and that his success in his space and what he's learned through that can also help you in your space in any industry, because successful people can help other successful people. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. For more free tools and resources on how you can grow your organization, be sure to subscribe to our podcast here on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Organizations struggle to grow because they don't know how to bring the best out of their people. Here at Waves Business Coaching, we inspire teams and optimize operations so that you and your organization can thrive. If you're a business leader and you want to bring the best out of your team, visit our website at wavesbusinesscoaching.com, which is linked in the episode description. If you want a free plan to optimize your business, be sure to take my business report, which is also linked in the episode description. In this free assessment, you'll get a diagnosis and plan to optimize your business, and it only takes 10 minutes. Be sure to click the link in the episode description to take my business report. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this episode of the Waves Business Coaching Podcast. Take care.